The video that you're going to see is about ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this channel, I'm a psychology student. I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychotherapist or anything like that. I can't give you a professional opinion that's based on clinical experience because I don't have that. What I'll be giving you is based on some of my experience as a student, but certainly based on some life experience as a person who has ADHD with a diagnosis. And because I've become interested in the subject for that reason, it's based on a lot of what I've read and listened to, mostly listened to because I find that easier. The things that I'm going to be saying are not really, well, not at all controversial, and they're certainly not new. There are experts out there who would happily say some of the things that I'm going to say. There are experts who have said these things, but I'm not an expert. It's also a fairly long video compared to some of the talking videos that I've done, so buckle up. Hi, Glenn here. So I have ADHD, and there are a few ways that I could approach talking about this. So I'm just going to grab one. I want to talk about the question of what a mental illness or a psychological issue is, because that affects the way that I think about this and all sorts of other things in mental health. Part of me doesn't like using sentences like, I have ADHD, although I say it because people know what I mean usually. I don't like saying, do you have this, or does she's got this, or do you think you might have this? You know, the word have. If you were to cut me open, you wouldn't see ADHD inside me. And even if, you couldn't even definitively detect it by examining all the neural activity in my brain and nervous system. I know not everyone shares that view, but to the best of my knowledge, you could not detect the fact that I had ADHD that way. I saw a claim at the website of an organization that exists to raise awareness of ADHD, and I want to make sure I get the quote right. It said, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder and describes the unique structure of your brain. Really? ADHD describes your brain structure? ADHD is not a brain structure. The idea that ADHD describes your brain structure is not what you learn when you learn about psychiatric conditions and diagnoses and so on. In fact, it contradicts it. There are a few ways of thinking about mental health issues, and one of them that is generally frowned on is sometimes called the disease or the pathology model. And according to this model, having a mental health issue is having a disease. It's like having any other disease, but it's just not. Suppose you've got hepatitis B, unfortunately. Well, if you do, it's because inside your body is the hepatitis B virus, and it produces the symptoms that it always produces. It will do some harm to your liver and some other things. I don't really know much about Hep B, but that doesn't matter. But if you're experiencing, say, major depressive disorder, which is a psychiatric diagnosis, it might be caused by actually any number of things in your life or in your thoughts. And two people who meet the diagnostic criteria, that is, two people who might be told by their therapist, you have major depressive disorder, might have entirely different causes behind it. Their lives might be totally different, and the reason that they're experiencing this depressive condition, they might be totally unrelated to each other, might have almost nothing in common. Psychiatric diagnoses, according to my coursework and textbooks at least, so what people are learning in universities at the moment anyway, are a combination of symptoms on the one hand and impact on the other. If you have at least a certain number of symptoms to a significant degree, and those symptoms are having a negative impact on your life to a certain extent, then you meet the diagnostic criteria. You have the condition, so to speak. And that's it as far as the diagnosis goes. So two people who meet the criteria for ADHD might have very different neurological issues, or issues of brain structure, if any such issues. And that doesn't change whether or not they meet the criteria. Those criteria, as listed in any diagnostic manual like the standard, the DSM-5, they've got nothing to do with brain structure. Brain structure, brain issues, neurological issues, they might be a cause. But if you ask any expert around the world, in fact, if you just Google what causes ADHD, well, they're all on record saying things like it's something in the brain, but we're not actually really clear about what the exact cause is. But that's just talk about causes. ADHD itself is definitely not a brain structure. ADHD is probably best described as a collection of behavior and experiences. So, as I was saying, I have ADHD. I meet the diagnostic criteria. Now, there's a lot more awareness about ADHD, especially in adults, than there was even just, say, 15 years ago. I think we probably all know that. But why have I only just recently decided to do something about it? I didn't seek assessment until last year. Well, I can tell you it's not because of any issues of stigma surrounding psychological health or mental health issues and what have you. That may have been the case once upon a time, but the truth is I really don't think there is that much of a stigma about these things now. Maybe that's just my experience, but I think that's what I'm seeing around me. In fact, I would go further than that and say I think we may have the opposite problem. How do I say this tactfully but truthfully? There's a contemporary culture with some quite political leanings, and I won't go into any of that, where you gain status points if you have or can say that you have factors in your life that make you oppressed in some way, and that includes mental health issues. So if you do have a mental health diagnosis, you list it in your social media profile like some sort of badge. And if you don't have a mental health diagnosis, then what you do is you diagnose yourself and you list that diagnosis in your social media profile. Or if you're not sure what your diagnosis would be, but you can't just be normal or vanilla, heaven help us, no, you couldn't be that. What you do is you put the word neurodivergent in your social media profile. And that's a word I don't like, but I won't go into why that's the case. Or, heaven help us, you use the word neurospicy, which is apparently the equivalent. Ironically, for people who take themselves at least somewhat seriously, although we're not boring, that makes it less likely, not more likely, that they will try and do something about the mental health issues that they're dealing with. Because there are a few things that I want less than to be a part of that pretentious, performative, virtue signaling, exhibitionist crowd of muppets. I told you I would be truthful, but it was really for practical reasons. Eventually, the symptoms that I was experiencing were becoming a serious hindrance to the things that I wanted to get done in my life. So I decided to act. There are plenty of good resources online where you can learn all about what ADHD is, or at least what the symptoms are and things like that. There are good articles, good interviews, good lectures. ADHD can be, some people see the H standing for hyperactive and they think of hyperactive kids. ADHD can be of the hyperactive variety, or it can be of the inattentive variety. In my case, I tend to lean towards the latter. I think maybe when I was younger, there was a bit more of both, but that could just be a youth thing. But one way of describing ADHD is to say that it's a problem with your, what's called the executive function, and that's something that there's a lot more talk about these days. So the executive function is a collection of cognitive processes and skills that regulate things like working memory, planning, task prioritization, and other things. I recently watched a video, because this talk isn't supposed to be a dry lecture about what ADHD is, so I'll just touch on this briefly. I watched a video recently which was an interview with a psychologist who was just giving a kind of public service announcement about what ADHD is and what some of the more common symptoms are. So I'll just quickly shoot through those. Some of these will be familiar to you already. So symptoms can include things like making careless mistakes or lacking attention to detail. If someone has difficulty sustaining attention over time, sometimes a person might seem as though they're not listening to you even though you're speaking directly to them. There may be no follow-through on tasks. Someone might have poor organisation, which in turn enables more procrastination. It can create difficulty following through. Remember my talk some time ago about habits that make you effective, where I stressed the importance of planning? I'll come back to that a bit later, actually. Number 6, they can avoid or dislike tasks that require sustained mental effort, so they can just not do them so that they don't fail because they know they're not very good at them. They can lose things that are necessary for the task that they're working on. Actually, this just seems like a really common thing, but especially common if you have this kind of difficulty with your executive function. Number 8, someone who is easily distracted by unrelated thoughts. Now, there are these myths that people tell, especially women, because I guess it might make them sound good, but that women are from men are from Mars and women are from Venus. You can tell how much time I spend with that rubbish. And one thing that women are really good at is multitasking, whereas men aren't really. The truth is, we don't multitask. That all that kind of discussion and thought is generally quite suspect. We don't multitask at all. What we do is we do one thing at a time and we switch between tasks. When you're already trying to wrangle the tasks in front of you and stay focused on them, if your executive function is lacking, then any side thoughts that pop up in your head may be triggered by just a word that's involved in your current task, a joke you remember from a long time ago that catches me. What are you laughing at? Oh, nothing. Because if you say a joke that I heard years ago, I don't know if people believe you or not. But anyway, that happens to me. Thoughts about a project that you would like to be working on, that also happens to me a lot. If these side thoughts come to you, and if you're not very good at staying focused on what you're meant to be thinking about, then, you go down that sidetrack and you start thinking about those other things. You get dragged off, mentally dragged off, and in a few minutes' time, you're saying, I'm sorry, where were we? Or, how long have I not been doing the thing that I should be doing? So you can easily see how these different issues are quite similar and they feed into each other. Because now you're procrastinating with thoughts that aren't getting you to your goal, you're not following through, you're going to make mistakes, etc. So they're all related and they reinforce each other. Lastly, the last thing that was listed in this thing that I saw recently is that you can be forgetful with daily activities. These are just examples, and you don't have to have every one of these issues to the same extent to meet the criteria. I don't, and there'll be issues I have that I haven't listed just here. But these are the standard sorts of things that you hear about when you hear about ADHD. And there will be strategies that you can come up with for each of these individual things to minimize the impact that they have or to reduce their frequency. Take losing things, for example. One strategy there, in fact, this is my strategy, is just routine. I'm quite sure that every member of my household, everyone who's ever been a member of my household, I have lectured at some point saying something along the lines of, you never have to think about where you put it if you always put it in the same place, that is, the right place. I must have. And there will be different tips that you will be able to apply and that will help you with each of the other things on that list. So that's some of the very standard information that's out there if you want to find out more about what ADHD is and what the standard symptoms are like and so on. But what about me? Because this video is called ADHD and me. And you, maybe. I've always had difficulty focusing on necessary tasks that take any length of time, and especially those that I don't immediately find enjoyable or interesting or in which I don't quickly enjoy success. That may seem like a pretty natural thing, but I guess it's always seemed to me that it's been really amplified in my case. Generally speaking, the first time that I became very aware that I had these tendencies and would have actually said so was when I was doing my undergraduate studies. But the thought of ADHD, at least by that name, wouldn't have occurred to me. We didn't really... This was sort of around the turn of the 21st century, which sounds like a long time ago when I use those terms. There wasn't really much talk about ADHD. I would have been aware of ADD, which I associated with children who act up and who are out of control. And so I wouldn't have associated that with me. I did very well in my tertiary study all the way up to a PhD because I found it fun. Some people would think that's weird, but I just really enjoyed the subject matter. So I was able to coast through based on intelligence and just the knowledge that I had of the subject matter, because this is stuff that had interested me for years. And so I knew a lot about it. My only method of trying to deal with my difficulty in sustaining attention or focus was just to, in sort of a vague and aggressive way, push myself, internally berating myself and ordering myself to work harder, which is actually very stressful. And it still is whenever I get tired of, just get tired and try to force myself that way. It makes you even more tired. It makes it more difficult because now you're having difficulty focusing and you're telling yourself off and you're still finding it difficult. It also, outside of study, I had come to think of myself as unreliable because of the frequency with which I would forget things. I would forget to meet obligations. And to this day, I think I still think about myself that way, even though I actually work quite hard on being disciplined and I'm probably quite reliable, but old mental habits die hard. They really do. I've returned to study now. I'm studying psychology years after getting a PhD. And the subject matter in the various papers in this psychology degree is not complicated or difficult, but the discipline of study really is. And this is where it really hit me. Hang on, this is going to be quite difficult. Why? What's going on? Why am I having so much trouble here? Subject matter is not difficult. Studying it is. Especially keeping up with the readings that I'm supposed to be doing. Just reading at all for any length of time is difficult. These days, it's different from my previous study because this is not information that I've been interested in for years. So I can't just fall back on being smart and having lots of good general knowledge about it because I don't have that general knowledge about it. So maybe this is why I'm noticing it more. It's easy to mask these symptoms when you're building your life around things that you find fun and engaging, because then it's easy to be focused on it all the time and you're not really having to work at it. But when it's something that you find you really have to work at, then it becomes visible, then it becomes a problem. I know that I'm capable of better results than these. I mean, I'm doing okay. I'm most of the way through the degree and I'm sort of a B+/A- student, so I am doing well, but the subject matter is clear enough to me and I kind of know what I'm capable of and I know where I want to go with this qualification, so that I'm looking at my results thinking I should actually be doing better than this. I'm capable of doing better than this. I do find it very easy to miss details. I need my study environment to be pretty much silent, which is quite a demand on people who live with me. Sometimes I just find it so much better if my computer reads the articles and documents to me while I read through them as well, so that I'm not going to be distracted by other thoughts or things in my environment. This definitely affects my work as well. Not as much in my current role, and I'll say a bit about that, but in previous roles it really has. It hasn't been a good thing. It feels like I apply an exorbitant amount of effort trying to force myself to focus on my tasks and to see them through, with far less return for that effort than seems economical. It seems I'm putting in too much compared to what I get out, and that's because I have these difficulties. And that's true of both work and study. These days I like to think of myself as a bit more humble than I might once have been, but I don't mind saying that, look, I'm a smart guy and I have a higher than average IQ, and in most ways I can get by on that, as well as some pretty good communication skills so that I can sell myself as doing quite well, even though I might not think that I am. And this is something that the psychiatrist that I spoke with mentioned to me. People who are generally quite intelligent but who have ADHD can mask the trouble that they're having because they can get all right outcomes. When I started to consider getting an assessment, I looked back over my high school reports, and I don't think that's something I had really done before. Look over them all in one go. And a number of the comments from teachers complained about the fact that although bright, I was easily distracted, that I chatted too much, I talked about my philosophy of life and not maths. I did not focus on the subject at hand, and in one case I was difficult to teach because of my frequent outbursts. And I look back and I think, gosh, I'm sorry, Mr. Rutter. I really am. Now, I've always described my time in high school as coasting through based on natural ability, but not achieving great results because I couldn't push myself to focus on the subject other than music, which was just fun. I wouldn't have thought of myself as one of those kids who had who had ADD, which is what I would have said back then. But looking back now at how my teachers described me, that's how it would sound to me as a parent. I would read that report and think, goodness, my son has ADHD. I still maintain a strong interest in the subjects of my previous studies, theology and philosophy, and also music. And when it comes to the first two of those subjects, I write and speak about those things sometimes, and I've got a pile of pieces for potential publication that are in various stages of being finished, and hence, I guess, various stages of being unfinished. Although I'm very interested in them, taking the time and investing the energy and focus to finish them off, which might not actually take very long, can just feel impossible. And then there's the workshop stuff that I do. Let me show you just a very short sequence of events that occurred in the workshop the other week. I came out here and just experienced a few moments that left me feeling slightly frustrated afterwards, and then I retraced those steps and I recorded them, and they went something like this. So the reason I came out to the workshop is that I remembered seeing this within the last couple of days. I don't know where it came from. It's a piece of sort of chipboard, not very nice stuff. It's a material that I would never buy for any purpose. And I noticed these circular holes that don't go all the way through. And I need to I'm possibly, for a design feature that I'm working on, possibly need to make a circular piece of wood that's about that size. But then I realized, oh no, actually I can't use this as the router template that I was thinking of because it's actually the inverse of what I want. Okay, so that was a mistake. Not quite what I wanted. I don't want to make a circular hole. I want to make a circular object. All right, so how might I do that? I then started looking at this trim router. I've got an attachment for this that I can use to cut circles. So I got that out and started tinkering with it and attached it, and then realized, oh no, actually the minimum size circle that I could cut with that is going to be too large for what I want. That isn't going to work. Okay, fine. Well, where's the piece of wood that I'm going to make this circle from? I'll just measure that. And while I was measuring it, I thought, well, I can't actually make any progress on this yet because I don't have what I need to make that circle, because I now think the best thing would be to use a hole saw. That would probably serve me well. So I'll just wait until I've got one of those. Hang on, what's that sitting over there? That's another project that I can do. In the meantime, I need to do some work with some planes, going through them and making sure the soles are nice and flat. And this piece of melamine is something that I bought for that purpose. I'll be sticking some sandpaper down and putting it on my bench. Gosh, my bench is messy. And there's this stuff that's been sitting over here for so long because I haven't really had the ideal place to put it, because that's a bench hook. Is that a bench? No, that's my shooting board. And the bench is the place for it, but I can't keep it on top of the bench because that's going to stop me from using my bench. There's a space down here, though. There's a rail there and a rail there. I could build some shelving for that, just to stow things, as long as it doesn't become a place where I stash things and forget about it, because then there'll be a mess accumulating, and I'll just put things there in a lazy manner instead of putting them away. I don't want to do that. But I can go ahead still and start making plans for that shelving. So I took some measurements, and then I went and dug around in my plywood scraps around there and found a piece of plywood that I'm going to be able to cut to shape. And yeah, that's what I'll do. Okay. Can't be bothered doing that just now, though. I really do want to get onto the plane, so instead oh no, wait, I can't put that on the bench. I'm going to have to move this. I'm going to have to move it off the bench and clear all this stuff out of the way. Where am I going to put it? Well, if I had a shelf I could... Hang on. Okay, so all of that's a little bit annoying at the moment. Maybe I need to figure out what the prerequisite condition is to resolve all of this. One thing I can do is work on this when I get a hole saw to work on it. Yes, then I'll be able to do that. But all this mess will still be here. Tell you what, maybe I'll just forget all of that for now, because I'm noticing that there's lots of mess that's sitting out here still. I should just, instead of thinking about those solutions, I should just spend some time tidying up and putting everything away until, while I'm doing that, I see a project that's interesting and demands my complete and full attention, and I should just do that instead. And that will occupy me for a few days. Now, that doesn't really perfectly capture what it's like to have ADHD. No very short moment could really do that. It wasn't scripted to capture that, it just happened. But so much of most of the activities that I'm involved in the workshop or at my desk, really are like that most of the time. That's what I was finding. I record and edit what I do in this workshop, so that any videos that people see of me, and this is true when I had a podcast, I still do actually, where I would deliver verbal presentations, so that to the observer it all looks very seamless and orderly. It's designed to look that way. And it's funny sometimes when I'm editing and I see some of the characteristics and quirks of speech and behavior that I would associate with other people who have ADHD, and they've been there my whole life. I didn't notice them because this is the only me I've ever known. I just think of these things as normal. I constantly find myself with a huge number of projects on the go at once, because I start one and then I can't sustain the attention on just one project when it comes to the finishing details. So I start another one, which then becomes the most important project ever until I'm distracted from that one to another one. Here are some guitars that I'm currently working on, and that's not all of them. There are a couple more inside the house. Occasionally, though, there will be a project that I just seem to be able to pick up and go overboard on with focus and neglect everything else for an extended period and get it finished. But that's the exception. But I've since learned that actually hyperfocus is something that ADHD people do sometimes as well. I don't necessarily know why that's the case. Maybe too that's a problem of executive function, because you shouldn't really hyperfocus on just one thing. But anyway, that is the exception. The norm is distraction, disorganization, and a very messy environment, in spite of the fact that I really value organization and tidiness. And I work hard against being disorganized. Some people would think I am organized, but I feel like I have a very hard time being organized. So the reason that I decided to seek assessment was not just that I have symptoms, but because those symptoms are affecting important parts of my life. I'm not achieving what I think I should achieve, which is frustrating to me. I think that I have too much potential and not enough realization of that potential, so I decided that I would do something about it. I think when people think about getting treatment for ADHD, they typically think about drugs. And yes, drugs. I was prescribed Ritalin That's a brand of methylphenidate, and I take it every day. Ritalin is a stimulant, and it helps me to, and initially when I first heard that people who have ADHD received a stimulant, I thought that's a bizarre thing to do. Wouldn't that make them more all over the place? But no, it doesn't actually. It helps me to focus on the task at hand. It makes me more wired and zeroed in on what it is I'm doing. I think it would probably help most people do that actually, but it's especially helpful for people who often have trouble with that kind of focus, like people with ADHD. It's worth using because it makes a positive difference to the things that I do each day. So I'm glad that I'm taking it. It's beneficial, but not a silver bullet. You shouldn't approach it with any kind of misconception that once you're taking this magic drug, you won't experience these issues anymore. It just helps. You still have ADHD, and you still have to do the work of managing that. Now, some of the things in my life that help me to manage things better might not be all that helpful to share, because they're not things that just anyone can necessarily reproduce in their own life. I'm very aware that my life is better than I deserve. I'm very blessed. I really think that I have no business having it this good when it comes to the way that I'm able to work. So I work in IT, sort of. It's a mix of things. There's some data analytics, there's some business analysis and miscellaneous tasks in that whole world, but it's not necessarily typical because I'm self-employed, I'm able to work from home, and my hours are very flexible, and I feel like I have a lot of freedom. Sometimes I'm very busy doing this, but just overall I feel like I have a lot more freedom. And so I can focus on these tasks for a while, and then if I find that it's just becoming quite hard to focus, if I find my thoughts drifting off to other things like my next workshop video or something that I want to add to an assignment that I'm working on, then I can get up from my desk for an hour and go and do that. A lot of people can't do that during their working day, so I'm really fortunate. Subject to my planning. Of course, I can't just forget my job and do whatever I like, and I'll talk about planning shortly. So I don't really have to manage myself as well as some people might need to. And look, I would definitely say, if you're in a position to break free from the office and find work that lets you divide your time up in a way that feels more natural for you, then absolutely do that. That will be life-changing. It really will. Now, being self-employed, I can only bill for the hours that I actually work, so I do still have to be able to rein myself in and get enough work done each week. But there are two broad types of strategy that I employ that I think overall helps me to manage myself. So the first general approach is good overall planning. And if you haven't seen it yet, I put out a video a little while ago about 8 habits that promote effectiveness. And other than being able to work a bit more on my own terms, the things that I talk about in that video seriously help me manage the difficulties that I have, especially, and this is what I'm talking about now, especially my self-imposed rules about planning and time management. And this can be a bit like being your own drill sergeant. Sometimes well-meaning people will talk about issues related to your own effectiveness and issues related to ADHD as well. And they'll say, look, you need to be gentle with yourself. You need to be kind to yourself. Sometimes that's very unhelpful advice, and you should not take it and you shouldn't give it. Yeah, I really think that's not what you need when coming up with strategies for effectiveness. I think what you need is to be very careful, to be quite rigorous, and to decide what's going to work and how you're going to make yourself do it. In fact, I really think you need to be, right now anyway, quite strict and unyielding with yourself and ask yourself serious questions about what you want. Okay, Glenn, when is that assignment due? Okay, so that assignment is due then. And what other things do you want to get done between now and then? You're being the stern father with the son, giving that advice that's going to help him to do well. Right? You're a person that you're trying to help. You need to see yourself that way. I think a few people have said that, but it's true. Okay, so what other things do you want to do between now and then? What other things do you need to get done? And which goals have higher priority over that time? And if you're not sure about which goals should have higher priority, then just ask yourself what it would look like if you failed to achieve those goals. So, okay, what about this assignment? If you don't submit that assignment on time and get a good grade, then you'll fail that course and you'll have to sit it again sometime in future. Well, that's not acceptable. So that goes to the top position. Well, what if failure means you don't finish whatever project you're working on as soon as you would like to? Well, bottom of the list, okay? That's not really a big deal. And then once you've prioritized, you've got your list in the order of priority, then what you do is you get ruthless when you start allocating time to those tasks. You allocate as much time as is necessary each day to the tasks at the top of the list. Just tweak those knobs. So consider when your due date is and then dial up the amount of time you're going to spend each day. I mean, you don't have perfect foresight, but you should be able to roughly estimate this so that you've spent enough time to get this thing finished in good condition by the due date. And then what you do is you move down the list, one item at a time, reading that book, building that project, finishing your next video. So you go down the list and you start tweaking the knobs for each item. End up at a decision about how much you need to spend on each one and how often over this same period of time. And at some point, and this is short-term planning, we're looking at maybe the next couple of weeks, no more than a month, definitely. This is what you're going to be doing in the immediate future. At some point, you might still have some items at the bottom of that list, but realistically, you can't commit to allocating any more time because it's all gone. You have to be okay with that. That's part of prioritization. You have to realize that some things get deprioritized to the point where you're not working on them now. And you're really not working on them now. They weren't important enough to make the cut, so they will have to wait until you finish one of the higher up things. And you've got to be very serious about that. Don't do anything on those tasks at the bottom. Rule them out. They are off limits. And they might be off limits for months. Remember, they're at the bottom because they're not important. They might be off limits for a year. You have to commit to this process. If I give time to them now, I will divide up my focus on the important things so much that I will ruin my life. You have to talk about it in those serious terms. Because for now at least, things will start to fall apart. Right? And this is the whole reason I'm having to do this, because I know it will not go well for me. So once you finish off the top thing, the very top thing, then, as long as another top thing hasn't come along, think about which of the bottom things, those luxury things, you're going to do, but not until then. So as well as planning, this is a pretty savage exercise in filtering. If this sounds too strict, well, you're wrong. It's really not. It's realistic. One of the keys to making this work and to not be too burdensome is that you mustn't treat too many things as having high priority. So maybe this is what you really need to do, cut things down. That's how I get into trouble. I find the thought of something interesting, so I start doing it. Now I've got another thing to juggle, and because it's new, well, it's super interesting, and so I prioritize it. So maybe this is the point where you need to be gentle with yourself, even though it might feel strict. Gentle in the sense that you don't pile your plate too high, so that if you find something interesting, you might think, oh, I'd like to do that, and you're like, but if I do that, I'm not being gentle with myself. I'm going to make life hard for myself, so I have to just say no. Apart from planning around my goals and cutting out whatever doesn't fit, I've had to sit down and have a proper think about what my life is about. Not in some ultimate sense. I've got values and beliefs around that. But what my life, say, this year can and should be about, given my goals. There can't be too many things. They just can't. Whenever I meet people, whether it's through a job or through an organization or anything, and we talk about what we do, I very often hear something like, gosh, you do so many things. In fact, it's something just in a conversation a few days ago with my personal trainer who I just met. And so we're talking about the things that we do. And he said, man, Glenn, you do a lot. And I do. I'm very aware of that. A lot of things gain my interest and are competing for space. So I had to really hack them down and decide what matters the most. And I've come up with a list of 6 things that my life must be about and which beat everything else. Number 1, I don't like saying it, but work. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Before all else. Number 2, family. Again, it's an obvious thing, but decide to prioritize it. Otherwise, you'll just take it for granted and say, well, of course, family is important, but then you won't actually, in practice, prioritize it. So make sure you do. Family. Especially, most importantly, my wife. And giving her the best life that I possibly can, insofar as that depends on me. I mean, she's a grown-up, and so to a large extent it depends on her as well. Number 3, our church community. I have to prioritize that. I am a Christian, but I'm not, if you knew me in person, you would know that I'm not the most super spiritual person that you're likely to meet. And if you know a super spiritual person, you'll know what I'm talking about. So my participation in church is the main way that I connect with God. And so it's a very important relationship to cultivate. So that gets priority. That's number 3. Number 4, study. I have broad, long-term goals about changing my professional direction in life. And right now, the main steps towards that goal all revolve around my studies. So I have to prioritize that. And my comprehension is great, but focusing on the things that I need to read and on my assignments is a huge task for me. It really is. So, got to prioritize my studies. If you suggest, and this has been true for a long time when someone has said, if you're interested in this subject, read this book. And I'm like, read a whole book? Are you kidding me? I just laugh at them. Like, sorry, my agenda's full for the next 10 years. I don't know how people can just read. I guess I do know how people can just read books. Number 1, they're fast readers, and number 2, they have empty lives. No, of course not. They're full of books, and that's fine. But it's not me. I could never do that. Number 5, my creative outputs, which mostly means this YouTube channel, although also my Monster Guitars YouTube channel, which I'm going to have to give some time to shortly. And number 6, my physical health. I'm in terrible shape. I conceal that sometimes with camera angles, but I've watched these videos. I know that you can see that I'm in terrible shape, and I'm trying to do something about that. This year, I'm slowly turning that around. Now, the time commitment isn't really huge. I go to the gym 4 times a week. That takes up some time anyway. I was going to say a fair bit of time, but not much. But it takes some time, but it's non-negotiable because it's very important. So it's on my list of important things that I'm prioritizing. And that's it. Those 6 things are what my whole life must be about right now. And I have to be protective of that because I know that there are other things that I like doing and which would detract from that. For example, over the years, I've had a lot of speaking and writing opportunities, which I love. But right now, I just have to say no. Unless it's an amazing opportunity or unless I really like you. But generally speaking, no, I'm just not going to do it. I can't. Maybe someone else could just add it to the pile and that would be fine, but I can't. I just know that I can't. I know that it doesn't go well for me when I have that many things to keep track of. Now, I'm not telling you about my 6 things because you should be interested in my life. It's just really an example of what prioritization looks like. This is the way that I've gone about it. Pick the things that you're about, which will then help you filter out the things that just aren't going to fit. Simplify and clarify your life. Decide what you're about. So maybe the way to sum up this overall approach that I'm taking is you can't do everything you want to. You just can't. There are lots of things that would be good to do. You can't do them all. But by realistically planning and prioritizing, you can get a lot more of what you want to do done. Now, I know that there are other strategies to look at and which might work well for you, especially strategies that deal with the immediate situation in front of you, about mindfulness, about not being distracted, about not procrastinating, strategies that you can implement on a daily basis. And I'm sure it would be good for me to look into some of those as well. I'm still really feeling my way around things and looking at and learning about what works and what doesn't for me. And you should do the same. But for now, I'm really hammering the short-term planning and scheduling and the prioritization that simplifies my life and focuses me overall on what I will allow myself to give time to and what I won't. I'm not going to be someone who uses ADHD as an explanation or really just an excuse for why I just don't get things done. I don't want to do that because it's not necessary. Instead, I'm trying to plan my life in such a way that I hope minimizes the effect that these unhelpful tendencies can have on me, because I don't give them much breathing space, as it were, because of the positive way that I arrange my life. There's a lot of effort and discipline involved in the approach that I'm taking, and I don't pretend that it's easy. You do have to work at it. There's a lot of outlay, like you have to make the decisions at the start and then stick to them. So no, it's not easy, but I think it produces some very good results. I think I'm seeing some good results so far. It is, in the big scheme of things, still early days, but I think it's going well. Doing this will make, I think, anyone more productive, whether you have ADHD or not. I think that's kind of obvious, actually. But if you do have these difficulties and you don't engage in this sort of planning and prioritization, then I think you'll be, well, what I should say is, I know that I would be much less productive, and I know that I would give myself a very hard time because of that, because I often have. I feel much better about the way that I'm living now. So, what about you? I've talked about me enough. What about you? If you are someone who looks at their life and says, I've got trouble with some really important things, focusing on tasks, progressing through things that I need to do without being distracted, paying attention, remembering, reading things that I need to read without tuning out, and so on, then please don't be put off seeking an assessment by the blue-haired social media weirdos. You just kind of ignore what everyone else is doing. Just say to yourself, okay, am I having these problems or am I not? Nobody will think you're following them if you're an even remotely sensible person. And I would say, don't be put off by what you might often hear, even coming from experts, about ADHD being way overdiagnosed. Because I think that can actually be quite dismissive. It can be a way of saying, no, just ignore what you think you're experiencing. It's probably not. It's probably not ADHD. It's probably nothing. Just snap out of it. People don't say that, but that's what I hear when people say, no, look, ADHD, way overdiagnosed. It's a way of minimizing what you're experiencing. Maybe you don't have it. Okay, but don't make that decision because of what so-and-so says. Ask yourself, are you experiencing these symptoms as far as you can tell, and are they causing you problems? Well, if the answer is yes, then look, so-and-so's opinion doesn't change that. What I found useful, although you have to be cautious with this, is to do an online self-screening. You do have to be very discerning because there is rubbish out there. There are social media quizzes about what style of that will tell you what style of ADHD you have, and there'll be this ridiculous list of subtypes that bear no resemblance to anything you would ever be diagnosed with. And it's kind of like do this short quiz to figure out whether or not your pronouns should be bun or z. It's just don't waste your time with anything like that. But there is a very good self-screening test that I did that's at the website of an organisation called ADHD New Zealand. And even if you're not in New Zealand, it's still probably a good thing to use. Just Google search for that, self-screening ADHD New Zealand, and you'll find it. I'll put a link to that self-screening in the notes under this video. I do suggest having a look at that. That can at least give you a rough indication of whether or not there might be something to look at. And that's all it professes to be. It's obviously not a diagnosis. It's just, here's a rough guide. It can validate initial concerns that you have. So it might say to you effectively, you might be onto something. Maybe you should look into that. Or maybe it might, the result might say, no, probably not. And maybe you need to pursue other avenues to see what it is that's troubling you. But if you do decide to bring it up with a mental health professional, and I think that's probably a good idea, whether you would be diagnosed with ADHD or not, then I think it's a good idea to print out the result of that quiz, just to take it along, something to start the discussion, say, hey, look, this is what I've been thinking, and actually the results of this self-screening indicate that I might be onto something. What do you think? And take it from there. I think that would be a good thing to do. That's what I did. Hey, if you're still watching, then thank you. I do appreciate you sticking it out. This is something I wanted to talk about because of the way that it affects me, and I just thought maybe you would find it interesting. Maybe it is something that's an issue for you, and if so, maybe I can just be the person who gives you that little nudge to try and do something about it, and that'd be great if I could play that role in your life. There are some stereotypes out there. I'll just wrap up now. There are some stereotypes out there about ADHD and the people who say that they have it, and the culture around neurodiversity, and maybe those stereotypes are true in some case. But what I had to do, and what I think it would be good for you or anyone to do, is just to try to push all of that aside. It's hard to ignore everything that's going on around you in this very active digital culture, but try to do that and just ask very practical questions of yourself. Are these problems that I experience, are they impacting on my life? Is it possible that I could improve my efficiency, my productivity, my level of satisfaction with what I'm achieving, and how I experience the tasks that I'm about? A reduction in some of the frustration that I'm experiencing. Man, that was a huge thing for me. If the answer to any of these questions is yes, as it was for me, then just do it. It's not difficult to explore this. It can take some time. Referrals for an assessment for ADHD in New Zealand do take a long time. But within a year, I think, gosh, a year? Yeah, it can take that long. But possibly not. Ask your doctor anyway. Talk to your medical professional. Nothing bad, probably, I assume, nothing bad will happen if you decide to investigate further. So there's that at least. Do a bit of self-screening. Bring it up with your doctor. In New Zealand, the way that you typically approach these things is you'll tell your GP, your general practitioner, your doctor, hey, look, I think I've got this issue that's worth looking at, and you can discuss with them next steps. Usually they'll make a referral to a mental health professional, depending on what the issue is. So that's probably the first port of call for you. Stop caring. Stop caring what anyone else might think. They don't even have to know. In fact, I would say don't be one of these people who broadcasts. Maybe that's just a personal thing. They irritate me, but whatever. But people don't have to know you're doing this. And then find out if things can be better for you. Because the truth is, they probably can.